Hey guys, tonight we ease into the long dusty trail of medieval Africa, where the air smells faintly of sun-baked clay and the horizon shimmers like a mirage. You stretch out under an endless sky, listening to crickets that sound more like creaky door hinges, and prepare to follow the life of a boy who grows into one of the richest humans to ever breathe. Yes, richer than the oil tycoons. Richer than the social media billionaires with their "look at my rocket ship" Instagram posts. But don't get too excited. You probably won't survive the mosquitoes or the dry heat of 13th century West Africa. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and the local time in the comments below. It's always fun to see who's drifting off to sleep in Tokyo, who's yawning in Toronto, and who's still wide awake in Timbuktu. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a village tucked along the bends of the Niger River. The year is somewhere in the late 1200s, and the air hums with the sounds of goats bleating and blacksmiths hammering iron. Here a child named Musa grows up. He isn't yet Mansa Musa, the Golden Emperor. For now he's just a boy chasing lizards in the dust and learning the rhythm of life that pulses through Mali. The empire is already powerful, stretching across grasslands where herders graze cattle and down river valleys where farmers tend millet and rice. You picture Musa standing in the shade of a baobab tree, squinting at the wide sky, perhaps dreaming of nothing more exotic than escaping his chores. Like any royal child, though, his daily reality mixes privilege with responsibility. He's the son of a line that traces power back to Sundiata Keita, the lion-like founder of Mali. From birth, Musa is surrounded by griots, storytellers whose job is to chant history so it never dies. Imagine falling asleep each night to epic poetry instead of TikTok loops. One mainstream historical fact is that Musa was born around 1280, at a time when Mali already controlled vast gold mines in Bambouk and Bure. These mines supplied nearly half the world's gold in that era. You don't need to picture him swimming in coins like Scrooge McDuck just yet, but the ground beneath his tiny feet literally glitters with future fortune. And here's your quirky tidbit. In West Africa, children sometimes used crocodile dung mixed with herbs as sunscreen. Yes, that was a thing. Imagine little Musa running around, smelling faintly like a reptile swamp, but at least not sizzling like a chicken nugget under that merciless Sahel sun. Historians still argue whether Musa's childhood was cloistered in a palace compound or more open to the rhythms of village life. Was he pampered, or was he expected to toughen up under the eyes of elders? The records don't quite agree. What they do agree on is that Musa grows up steeped in both Islam and local traditions. Learning early how to walk between two worlds, you lean into the scene. Horses snort as they're fed millet husks. Traders unload baskets of kola nuts brought up from the forest belt. And scribes in flowing robes copy verses of the Quran onto parchment. Musa absorbs this mix like a sponge. He hears elders describe how caravans vanish into the desert, trudging north toward markets as far away as Morocco. He hears stories of kings who wield both the sword and the prayer bead. He notices how every decision, when to plant, when to trade, when to march to war, is guided not just by politics but by the pulse of faith. By night, as drums echo through the dark and fireflies blink lazily, Musa lies awake. The stars are so sharp and clear they seem close enough to pluck, and every constellation is tied to a story. Maybe someone whispers the tale of Sundiata, the crippled boy who became Mali's Lion King. You smile. knowing that young Musa is measuring himself against those legendary footsteps. Will he matter? Will he lead? For now he's just a boy with crocodile dung sunscreen, but the road ahead is golden, literally. You wander further into Musa's world, and suddenly the air thickens with incense, the low hum of prayers, and the chatter of courtiers in polished sandals. The boy is older now, no longer just the kid darting after lizards, but a prince moving through the royal court of Mali. You can almost feel the cool stone floors underfoot, and the faint scratch of papyrus as scribes copy down decrees. This is where young Musa learns what power tastes like, not sugarcane sweet, but more like gritty millet porridge, nourishing, sometimes bland, and occasionally hard to swallow. Royal training is no casual affair. He sits in rooms where griots chant the genealogies of past kings, so no one forgets who begat whom, and which uncle fought which battle. You picture Musa fighting to keep his eyes open through one of these marathon storytelling sessions, the way you might in a modern corporate PowerPoint marathon. Only here, instead of quarterly profits, it's which ancestor stabbed whose rival on a moonlit night centuries ago. One mainstream fact is that the Malian court blended Islamic scholarship with indigenous traditions. The rulers maintained close ties with Muslim scholars from the north, while also relying on the griot's oral wisdom. So Musa, as a young prince, learned not only Arabic prayers and Quranic verses, but also the coded metaphors of local proverbs. Imagine juggling math homework and Shakespeare essays, except your teachers are also deciding if you'll be fit to rule millions of people one day. And then there's the quirky tidbit. In some Sahelian courts, it wasn't uncommon for attendants to fan royalty with ostrich feathers while they listened to petitions. Picture Musa pretending to stay dignified, but secretly enjoying the ticklish breeze on the back of his neck. You have to wonder if he ever broke into a grin and ruined the whole regal effect. Historians still argue whether Musa was groomed deliberately for the throne or whether fate would simply thrust him forward later. Some accounts suggest he wasn't the obvious heir, more like a backup quarterback who suddenly finds himself holding the ball. Either way, these lessons in diplomacy, ritual, and religion carve grooves into his young mind. At court, Musa hears about caravans bringing salt slabs from the Sahara, each one heavier than your entire gym routine, exchanged for gold dust measured in gourds. He learns that control of rivers and trade routes matters more than flashy armor. He studies how emissaries are welcomed, their robes glittering with northern embroidery, their tongues carrying news from Cairo and Marrakesh. And he watches his elders make judgments, not always fair but always final. In disputes over grazing lands or unpaid debts, through it all, he absorbs the rhythm of power, slow, deliberate, sometimes theatrical. He notices how the king doesn't shout to show strength. He waits. Silence, he realizes, is sometimes more terrifying than a spear. You can almost imagine Musa storing away that lesson like a secret weapon. Evenings in the palace are softer. Torches flicker against mud brick walls. Musicians pluck the kora, and storytellers weave epics that blur history and myth. Musa listens, perhaps clutching a wooden tablet used for Quranic verses, and thinks about what it means to be remembered. He knows that one day, if fate twists just so, the griots will speak his name, and you can sense him wrestling with that idea under the starlight, caught between childhood play and looming destiny. It's in these courtyards and halls, somewhere between a whispered prayer and a stern lecture from a tutor, that the boy begins to shape into the man who will one day stun Cairo, humble Venice, and turn Timbuktu into a word that echoes across centuries. For now, though, you can still catch him stealing a sweet date from a platter. Just another kid trying to dodge his homework while history sharpens its focus on him. The palace air feels heavier now, charged with whispers of fate. You notice Musa's shoulders, broader with age, carrying not just the weight of adolescence, but the looming burden of rule. The empire of Mali is vast, and thrones do not always pass neatly from father to son. Accidents happen, kings vanish on expeditions, and succession can flip like a coin tossed into a well. This is how Musa, still young, finds himself dragged toward a crown he didn't necessarily expect. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Musa rose to power in 1312 after the previous Mansa. Abu Bakr II supposedly sailed westward into the Atlantic with a massive fleet, intent on discovering what lay beyond the ocean. That's right. Before Columbus dreamed of bumbling into the Caribbean, a West African king had already launched a bold maritime expedition. He never came back. And just like that, Mali needed a ruler. Now the quirky tidbit, Abu Bakr's fleet wasn't a handful of dinghies. Accounts claim it may have been 200 ships, with crews and supplies for years. It sounds more like the plot of a fantasy novel than a history scroll, but it's whispered that Musa was chosen as deputy, while Abu Bakr sailed off, making him the stand-in king, until stand-in became permanent. Imagine being handed the keys to an empire just because your boss decided to go on the most ambitious vacation in history. Historians still argue whether this story is accurate. Did Abu Bakr truly set sail across the Atlantic, or is this tale part myth, stitched together later to explain a sudden vacancy? Either way, Musa's rise feels sudden, like being shoved from the back row of the theater straight onto the stage. You picture him pacing the royal compound, maybe in disbelief. One day he's nodding politely during council sessions. The next he's sitting on a golden throne with petitions piling up and caravans demanding safe passage. His fingers, once used for tracing verses on wooden boards, now grip the scepter of kingship. And that scepter, it isn't just symbolic. Mali's throne means direct control over trade routes that stretch from the lush forests of Guinea to the burning sands of the Sahara. It means balancing fragile alliances among clans, chiefs, and cities spread over thousands of miles. It means, quite literally, holding the golden lifeline of the medieval world in your hands. At first, Musa may have leaned on advisors, the griots who remembered Sundiata's laws, the imams who advised on Islamic duty, the generals who could sniff out rebellion like a lion smells blood. But step by step he settles into the role, like sandals molding to his feet. People bow deeper, emissaries kneel longer, and Musa begins to realize this empire is now his to steer. You drift into the imagery of his coronation, the air thick with drumming, the scent of roasted meat, and the shimmer of gold dust thrown in celebration. Crowds chant blessings, griots sing of destiny, and Musa feels the strange mix of pride and terror that comes with leadership. He must prove he is not a mere placeholder, not the boy under the baobab tree, but a man who can wield wealth and faith as weapons of statecraft. In those first months, you imagine him barely sleeping, lying awake in his chamber while bats flicker through the rafters. The silence is loud. Every decision matters. A tax too heavy can spark rebellion. A war gone wrong can unravel borders. A misstep in prayer can anger both imam and elder. You can almost hear Musa whispering into the night, half prayer, half pep talk. I must hold this together. But one thing is certain. By the time dawn breaks, he steps into the light as Mansa Musa, ruler of one of the richest empires in history, a man who will soon shock the world with generosity so lavish that entire economies tremble. For now, though, he is simply adjusting the crown, trying not to let it slip. The horizon widens before you now, and the empire of Mali stretches out like an enormous quilt, stitched from savanna, desert, and forest. You stand alongside Musa as he surveys what he has inherited, a dominion so sprawling that even the camels look unimpressed by the distances involved. The Niger River curls through the land like a blue ribbon, carrying barges of grain and fish, while trade routes radiate outward across the Sahara like veins of wealth. The mainstream historical fact here is striking. By Musa's reign, Mali was the largest empire in West Africa, covering over 500,000 square miles. That's bigger than modern-day France, Spain, and Germany combined. Its influence reached the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, north into the Sahara, and east toward the Hausa lands. From every direction, goods flowed in: ivory tusks, slaves, salt slabs, gold dust. And every caravan seemed to pulse toward Mali like a heartbeat. But let's add a quirky tidbit. In parts of Mali, traders used tiny nuggets of gold dust so precious that they were stored in quills of bird feathers. Picture a dignified merchant reaching into his pouch and delicately blowing dust from a feather tube to seal a deal. While you're here thinking about the glitter bomb you once accidentally opened at a birthday party. Same sparkle, wildly different stakes. Historians still argue whether the empire's borders were tightly controlled or more like a loose net of alliances. Was Musa's rule felt directly in faraway villages, or did distant chiefs simply nod politely and send a cut of their profits? The records don't pin it down. What's clear, though, is that Mali was the gravitational center of West Africa, pulling wealth, knowledge, and ambition into its orbit. You move with Musa along the trade arteries. Northward, caravans lumber across the desert carrying salt, each block hewn from mines in Tagaza, so vital that people joked gold was plentiful, but salt kept you alive. Southward, forest roots hum with kola nuts, caffeinated little seeds chewed like medieval energy drinks. Eastward, scholars and manuscripts trickle in from Islamic centers, and woven into it all is gold, Mali's shimmering lifeblood, pouring into markets from mines at Bambuk and beyond. You imagine Musa standing at the confluence of these roads, his robes brushing against sand, hearing the clamor of camel bells and bargaining voices. He realizes that control of these routes is more than riches. It's power. Whoever commands the movement of salt and gold commands the world's imagination. And Musa, now steady on his throne, sees that imagination is currency. At the heart of this empire beats the river. The Niger is not just water. It's a highway, a pantry, and a storybook. Along its banks rise cities like Niani, the capital, where Musa holds court. Gao, a hub further east, and quietly growing in importance, Timbuktu, which even now whispers of future greatness. Farmers flood their fields with its waters, traders push canoes loaded with goods, and children splash at its edges, their laughter echoing like bells in the dusk. At night, the empire hums with life. Griots sing epics under starlight, their voices carrying across courtyards. Drums ripple through villages. Goats shuffle in pens and fires crackle as women stir pots of millet stew. Musa, wrapped in thought, hears it all. He knows this empire is a living creature, fragile, beautiful, and demanding. To keep it thriving, he must hold together rivers, deserts, and people as varied as the stars overhead. The scope of Mali is dizzying, and you feel yourself drifting as though carried on the trade winds. The smell of salt, the glitter of gold dust, the murmur of prayers, the shuffle of caravan feet, all swirl into one vast tapestry. And in its center sits Musa, crown gleaming faintly in the moonlight, gazing across a kingdom so rich it seems almost unreal, yet heavy with responsibilities that keep him wide awake long after the griots have fallen silent. You linger now in the palace courtyard, where the air carries both the smoke of incense and the dust of hooves arriving from distant lands. Musa is no longer the nervous young man fumbling with a crown. He sits taller, his eyes calm, his gestures measured. The empire breathes through him, and he knows its pulse depends not only on trade and armies, but also on something deeper, faith, the mainstream historical fact. Mali under Musa was a Muslim empire, at least in its ruling class. Islam had spread into West Africa centuries earlier via trade, bringing scholars, clerics, and books bound in leather. Musa himself was devout, known to pray regularly and support Islamic institutions. Yet Mali wasn't purely Islamic. It was also a land of animist traditions, ancestral spirits, and rituals rooted in the soil. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Malian rulers, while Muslim in title, kept charms or amulets called grigri, tiny leather pouches filled with verses of the Quran, herbs, or even bits of animal bone. They were worn for protection, kind of like carrying both a Bible verse and a lucky rabbit's foot in the same necklace. Musa likely respected these traditions, even if he leaned toward Orthodox Islam. Historians still argue whether Musa's piety was personal or political. Did he truly embrace Islam for its spiritual depth? Or was he strategically aligning with the wider Muslim world for prestige and trade benefits? The truth is probably both. After all, a king who prays earns legitimacy from clerics, while a king who funds mosques earns respect from traders who come from as far as Cairo or Mecca. In his court, you see imams debating law, griots chanting genealogies, and elders murmuring about spirits in the trees. Musa listens to all of them. His genius lies in balancing these voices rather than silencing them. Faith and politics become a woven mat, overlapping, colorful, and impossible to separate without unraveling the whole thing. Walk with him through Niani, the capital. You smell fresh clay from a newly built mosque, hear children reciting Quran in sing-song Arabic, and catch the sight of elders still pouring libations to the earth before planting crops. Musa doesn't forbid it. He simply lets both streams flow. His empire thrives because it accommodates, like a wide river bending around rocks instead of smashing against them. At council, he invokes God's name before decrees. In private, he consults scholars about the finer points of Islamic law. But when a village chief insists on performing an ancient ritual to ensure rainfall, Musa doesn't interfere. He knows that power depends on unity, and unity depends on tolerance. In this, he shows a wisdom that keeps the empire from splintering. By night, the stars hang sharp in the Sahel sky, and Musa prays under their glow. You imagine him kneeling, forehead pressed to a prayer mat, whispering verses that connect him across the desert to distant Cairo, to Damascus, to Mecca itself. Yet in the shadows, you might also glimpse villagers murmuring to river spirits, their chants blending into the same night air. Both reach upward, seeking the same mysterious balance. Faith for Musa isn't just about the afterlife, it's a tool for ruling the here and now. Religion legitimizes his reign, strengthens alliances, and opens doors to the great centers of the Islamic world. But at its core, it also gives him a rhythm to breathe by, a framework to lean on when the empire's demands feel endless. So you watch him rise from prayer, straighten his robes, and step back into the swirl of politics, commerce, and ceremony. His face is serene, but you sense the weight behind his calm. For Musa, ruling means carrying both the Quran and the drumbeat of his ancestors, and weaving them into a single voice that his empire can follow. You drift further into the empire's veins now, where the heartbeat of wealth isn't in the crown jewels or ceremonial thrones, but in the endless caravans plodding like tired giants across the land. Musa has settled into his reign, and beneath the polished prayers and royal decrees lies the true machinery of Mali. The quiet, grinding, dusty, sweaty business of moving goods. The mainstream historical fact is simple but staggering. Mali controlled the gold mines of Bambouk and Bure, and later the region of Gao. These mines produced nearly half the known world's supply of gold during Musa's lifetime. Half the world. You imagine miners deep in shafts, their lamps flickering, their hands caked with earth, while above them, the empire quietly hums with prosperity. And then, the quirky tidbit, gold wasn't actually used for everyday transactions within Mali itself. Ordinary people bought grain or cloth with cowrie shells, chunks of salt, or even little iron rods. Gold dust, though dazzling, was too valuable for daily use. It was the stuff of international trade. So picture a Malian farmer handing over a bag of cowrie shells for a sack of millet, while kings and merchants negotiated gold by the pound. It's like paying for groceries with monopoly money while your landlord demands rent in bars of platinum. Historians still argue whether the system of gold regulation was tightly controlled by the crown or more laissez-faire. Some sources claim the Mansa himself kept an iron grip, allowing only gold dust to circulate while reserving large nuggets for the state. Others suggest local miners and traders had more freedom. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, structured but not suffocating. Follow one of the caravans. You hear the groan of camels as they're loaded with salt slabs, each one weighing as much as a person. Slaves trudge beside them, carrying bundles of kola nuts, those bitter little seeds destined to fuel conversations across North Africa. The road is slow, monotonous, and hot enough to cook bread on a saddle. Sand creeps into nostrils, ears, and even thoughts. Yet these caravans are arteries feeding the empire. Without them, Mali is just gold in the ground. Musa knows this. He doesn't sit back counting coins like a lazy dragon on a hoard. He invests in security, posts guards along routes, and ensures that traders feel safe moving through his lands. Bandits still lurk, of course, but the empire's presence looms large. A caravan under Musa's protection is more likely to reach its destination intact, and that promise alone pulls more traders toward Mali. In the capital of Niani, you picture Musa inspecting a fresh load, sacks of salt stacked like building blocks, piles of gold dust glowing faintly in gourds, ivory tusks leaning against palace walls. It looks less like a royal hoard and more like a bizarre medieval Costco. The sheer variety is dizzying. Spices from the Sahara, fabrics from the forest, manuscripts from the east. At night, the traders light fires, their camels kneeling in tired heaps, the air spiced with roasting goat. Musa may not camp with them, but in his palace he hears their reports. Routes are open. Roads are safe. Gold flows like a slow river. He understands that empires rise not on flashy battles, but on the steady shuffle of feet and hooves. The machinery of wealth is not loud. It's not even glamorous. It's dusty, repetitive, and fragile. But as you follow the rhythm, hoof, step, breath, you realize that this is the real secret behind Musa's coming fame. Not luck, not just faith, but caravans. Endless caravans trudging into the horizon, carrying the empire's heart in bundles of salt, feathers of gold dust, and seeds of kola. And so you lean into the slow monotony, eyelids heavy, lulled by the thought that the richest man in history relied on the same rhythm you hear now. A slow, patient march, one tired foot after another, until the desert gives way to fortune. You shift now from the humming caravans to the quieter rhythms of daily life, where Musa's empire breathes not only through gold and salt, but through the ordinary hands that shape its days. You walk through villages scattered across the savannah, hearing roosters crow, smelling wood smoke curling from clay ovens, and feeling the steady, simple heartbeat of Mali's people. The mainstream historical fact: Mali's wealth may have dazzled outsiders, but the foundation of the empire was agriculture. Farmers cultivated millet, rice, and sorghum along the fertile floodplains of the Niger River. Without their grain, no caravans marched, no scholars studied, no kings sat comfortably on golden thrones. The empire's stability depended on these humble fields. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some areas, children tied rattles to the tails of goats so the jingling noise would scare away birds from the crops. Imagine the morning soundscape, clanging goat bells doubling as a medieval scarecrow system. You're half asleep already just picturing it. Historians still argue whether most of Mali's people lived under tight central control or enjoyed more independence in their villages. Did Musa's officials monitor every harvest, or did local chiefs and elders run things with only a nod to the empire? The truth is cloudy. What's clear is that Mali was less a machine and more a network. Threads of farmers, herders, smiths, and traders woven together, all benefiting from the safety and order Musa maintained. You wander among blacksmiths at their forges, sparks flying like fireflies. Blacksmiths held spiritual power in many communities, seen as keepers of secret knowledge. They shape iron hoes for the fields, spears for hunters, and bracelets for adornment. Musa himself, though elevated, knows that his empire depends on these ordinary craftsmen. Without hoes, no fields. Without spears, no defense. Without bracelets, well, fewer fashion statements, and no one wants that. Step into a market square and you hear the chatter of traders. Women spread cloth on the ground, selling spices, dried fish, and colorful textiles dyed with indigo. Storytellers gather crowds, weaving tales that blend history and myth, while musicians strum chorus, their strings rippling like gentle rain. A traveler arriving here might not see the emperor, but they would feel his presence in the order of the stalls, the peace of the square, and the fairness of scales weighed under his law. And then there are the griots, the keepers of memory. You sit beside one as he chants into the night, his voice gravelly yet melodic, recounting the deeds of Sundiata Keita, the empire's founder. Musa grew up with these stories, and now they are sung about him too, though quietly, not yet in the grand epics. The griots ensure that no day, no life, no harvest is lost to silence. You drift listening to their words, half lullaby, half lecture, threading you into the long line of memory. But life isn't only toil and tales. Villages celebrate with dances, pounding drums echoing against the night sky. Children chase each other barefoot, the dust soft beneath their feet. Women braid hair in intricate patterns, conversations flowing as fast as their fingers. Men gather to debate politics or just gossip about who cheated whom in last week's wrestling match. It is a world vibrant in its simplicity, far from the glamour of golden thrones, yet utterly essential to them. Musa, seated in Niani, understands this. His decrees may stretch across deserts, but his power depends on whether farmers eat well, whether markets hum, whether smiths keep forging. He rules an empire, yes, but his empire is also a village multiplied 1,000 times over. So you lean into the rhythm of daily life, the smell of millet porridge bubbling in clay pots, the hiss of iron in a forge, the laughter of children with goat bells jingling in the fields. It is steady, it is ordinary, and it is the quiet foundation of the richest man's world. You follow the Niger River's slow curl northward, where the desert begins to creep closer, and there, almost by accident, a small trading post is growing into something more. This place, dusty and modest for now, is called Timbuktu. You can almost smell the dry air mixed with smoke from cooking fires. Hear the shuffle of camels unloading salt slabs, and feel the buzz of something quietly extraordinary taking shape. The mainstream historical fact: Timbuktu was founded in the 12th century as a seasonal camp by Tuareg nomads. By Musa's reign, it had become a permanent settlement and an important node in trans-Saharan trade. It sat perfectly at the edge of desert and river, a hinge where caravans and canoes met. Traders brought salt from the north, gold and slaves from the south, and books from the east. It was less a city at first than a warehouse with ambition. Now, for the quirky tidbit, the name Timbuktu is often explained in oral tradition as coming from Timbuktu, meaning the place of Buktu, referring to an old woman who kept a camp there. Imagine that. An entire city's fame across centuries and continents traced back, supposedly, to Grandma Buktu watching over her well. Not exactly the glamorous origin you'd expect, but somehow fitting. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's early growth under Musa was strategic, deliberately cultivated, or simply organic, the natural result of trade networks converging. Did Musa recognize its potential right away, or did it flourish more fully under his successors? Either way, he certainly invested in it, planting the seeds that would make it legendary. You walk through the early streets. They are narrow, crowded with merchants hawking dates, kola nuts and salt. Donkeys bray, children dart between stalls, and the air is thick with competing smells: smoke, sweat, spices, and parchment ink. Among the goods, manuscripts are quietly becoming as precious as gold. A trader might exchange a camel load of salt for a single book copied in elegant Arabic script. Knowledge itself is currency here. Musa notices this. He supports the growth of mosques and learning circles. Though the city still looks like mud brick sprawl, it carries a hum of scholarship. Young students sit cross-legged, scratching verses of the Quran on wooden boards, their voices rising in sing-song unison. Teachers gesture with reed pens, quoting lines from distant scholars in Cairo or Cordoba. You can almost feel the dust of knowledge floating in the air, settling into the bones of this place. And trade never stops. Caravans line up outside the gates, camels kneeling in the sand with loads of copper, ivory, and textiles. Boats slide along the Niger with bundles of grain. At night, fires flicker against the desert sky, and the marketplace turns into a social hub. Drummers playing rhythms, griots reciting, strangers swapping stories of journeys that span half a continent. Musa invests carefully here, knowing that a strong Timbuktu means a strong Mali. He funds construction, brings scholars, and ensures safety for merchants. What began as Grandma Buktu's well is now becoming a crossroads of civilization. One day, Timbuktu will be whispered in faraway lands as a city of unimaginable wealth and wisdom, the very symbol of exotic distance. But for now, it is just beginning its climb. Like a faint star that will one day blaze, you lean into that image. Mud brick walls glowing orange in sunset, camels shifting restlessly at the gates, the air thick with a mix of salt dust and ink, and a young city humming, not knowing yet that it will become a legend. You stand now in the heat of midday, watching dust rise from the hands of masons as they shape the empire into permanence. Musa is no longer simply ruling through decrees and caravans, he is building. The clang of hammers on stone, the slap of wet clay against wooden molds, the creak of scaffolding, these are the new rhythms of his reign. If wealth makes people listen, buildings make them remember. The mainstream historical fact: Musa famously commissioned grand architectural works across Mali, most notably mosques. The Jingareba Mosque in Timbuktu, built with the help of the Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, still stands today, though repaired countless times, as a testimony to his vision. Mud brick, timber beams and limestone formed structures that could withstand centuries of sun and sand. Here's the quirky tidbit. West African builders often mix straw and even fish bones into their mud plaster to help hold walls together. Imagine walking past a mosque wall, its grandeur towering above you, and realizing you're essentially admiring medieval fish cement. Somehow it works. Historians still argue whether Musa himself directly hired al-Sahili or whether later accounts exaggerated his involvement. Was this master architect really brought from Spain on Musa's return from pilgrimage, or was he simply one of many foreign craftsmen drawn to the empire? The debate lingers, but the results remain. Architecture that fused local techniques with Islamic inspiration. Walk through Timbuktu's Jingareba Mosque as it rises. Workers press clay into wooden frames, stacking bricks with a rhythm that sounds almost musical. Wooden beams protrude from the walls, not decoration, but scaffolding pegs left in place so future generations can climb and replaster. Students gather around courtyards, their wooden tablets covered in Quranic verses, voices overlapping in a chant that bounces against fresh plaster. In Gao, in Niani and in lesser towns, new mosques and palaces appear. Musa isn't just expanding buildings, he's planting symbols. Every mud tower is a declaration that Mali isn't a temporary flicker, but a flame that will last. Gold funds these projects, but what Musa is really constructing is memory. He knows that caravans may pass, markets may fade, but walls remain, whispering his name long after he is gone. And it isn't just mosques. Musa builds halls for judgment, resting stations for caravans and fortifications along vulnerable routes. Picture travelers arriving after weeks in the Sahara, stepping into a shaded rest house with cool water and carved beams, whispering gratitude for the empire that made such an oasis possible. That too is power. Not just swords and taxes, but hospitality. At night, as torches glow against newly raised walls, the city hums differently. The skyline itself has changed. Mud towers rise where once only huts stood, their shadows falling long across the desert sand. Musa steps back to admire them, robes brushing against the earth, knowing he has turned dust into permanence. You linger in that moment, feeling the warmth of sun-baked clay under your fingertips, hearing the muffled echo of prayers inside fresh walls, smelling the straw-laced plaster as it dries in the heat. The richest man in the world has found another way to spend his fortune. Not in fleeting luxury, but in monuments that sing his legacy into the centuries. You shift into the quiet anticipation of a journey so large that even the sands seem to shiver. Musa, seated in Niani, is preparing for what will become the most legendary pilgrimage of his age. The air is thick with the smell of leather saddlebags being stitched, grain sacks piled high, and camels grumbling as though they already know how much work lies ahead. The mainstream historical fact: in 1324, Musa set out on his Hajj to Mecca, the sacred pilgrimage required of Muslims. It wasn't a discreet personal trip. It was an expedition of mythic proportions, said to include tens of thousands of attendants, hundreds of camels, and so much gold that entire economies bent under its weight. The quirky tidbit: some accounts claim the caravan stretched so far that when the front reached a village, the rear hadn't even left the last one. Imagine being in the middle of that line, too far to see Musa, too far to see the camels at the front, just trudging along, hoping the guy ahead of you doesn't drop his salt block on your foot. Historians still argue about the numbers, Was it really 60,000 people or 40? Or did chroniclers inflate the scale to impress readers back in Cairo and Cordoba? The math is fuzzy, but the effect is clear. Musa's pilgrimage wasn't subtle. It was a moving empire across the desert. Picture the preparations. Artisans in Niani pound gold into dust and ingots. Scribes copy Qurans onto parchment. Gifts for scholars abroad. Tailors sew robes of cotton and imported silks for attendants. Herds of cattle and sheep are gathered to provide meat along the way. Musa oversees it all, his calm expression hiding the monumental logistics. Caravans form ranks outside the capital, camels loaded with gold, donkeys stacked with provisions, slaves carrying bundles of fabric, soldiers armed with spears. It looks less like a pilgrimage and more like a slow-motion moving city. The clamor is immense. Bells jingling, camels roaring, children shouting, cooks stirring cauldrons, griots rehearsing songs to pass the time, and imagine Musa himself. He doesn't march alone, of course. He rides in splendor, shaded by a parasol, surrounded by guards. His presence radiates wealth and power, yet his destination is spiritual. He is not only going to Mecca to pray, but also to announce Mali's place in the Islamic world. Every ounce of gold, every robe, every drumbeat says, this empire is rich, pious, and undeniable. Even the villages he passes before reaching the desert are stunned. Farmers drop hoes mid-harvest. Children gape, griots compose verses on the spot. This isn't just a king leaving for a trip. It's the earth itself groaning under the weight of history moving forward. By night, the camp sprawls across the plains like a galaxy of fire. Torches flicker, musicians strum, and the smell of roasting meat floats through the air. Musa prays beneath the stars, his forehead pressed to the ground even as his attendants arrange gifts of gold for the dignitaries he will meet. The pilgrimage is no longer just a religious duty. It is becoming theater, diplomacy, and spectacle wrapped into one. And as you watch Musa step into the desert, flanked by thousands, you realize the world is about to learn the name of Mali in a way that can never be forgotten. The desert stretches before you now, endless and merciless as Musa's colossal caravan pushes northward. The horizon wavers with heat, dunes ripple like frozen waves, and every footstep crunches into sand that seems determined to swallow the journey whole. You trudge alongside them, feeling your throat dry just from imagining the air. The mainstream historical fact: Musa's caravan crossed the Sahara along routes linking Mali to Egypt, one of the harshest journeys on Earth. Caravans relied on oases scattered across the desert, lifelines of water and shade, without which entire expeditions would vanish. The Hajj was not simply a religious act, it was a logistical miracle. The quirky tidbit: camels, those grumpy desert ships, can drink up to 40 gallons of water in one go. Imagine the poor attendants trying to refill giant leather bags at an oasis, while the camels slurp like they're at an all-you-can-drink buffet. Even wealth couldn't make the desert easier. Camels still belched bit, and complained the whole way. Historians still argue whether Musa's caravan took the western route via Walata and Tuat, or a more central line across Tagasa. Both were perilous. Some scholars insist the sheer size of his entourage would have demanded the more established route. Others argue the records exaggerate, and that Musa took a leaner path. Either way, the sand swallowed no small share of effort and fear. You hear the rhythm, bells clinking from camel necks, sandals crunching, the steady chant of prayers whispered against the wind. Men shield their faces with cloth, eyes squinting against blinding sun. Salt slabs crack in the heat, slaves stagger under loads, soldiers scan the horizon for raiders, Cooks scrape out meager rations in the evenings. It is monotonous, punishing, and strangely hypnotic. At each oasis, the camp erupts in chaos. Camels kneel groaning. Attendants collapse into shade. Children splash in shallow wells. Musa inspects, calm as ever, robes fluttering faintly. His composure is its own fuel for the masses. If the Mansa is steady, then the journey must succeed. Behind him, griots strum soft songs, turning exhaustion into melody that drifts like smoke across the sand. And yet, for all its grandeur, the journey is fragile. One storm could bury men alive. One missed oasis could end hundreds. The desert doesn't care about gold or crowns. You imagine Musa at night, kneeling in prayer, his voice carried by the wind across dunes that have outlasted kings. Wealth cannot bribe the Sahara. It can only endure it. So you trudge onward, lulled by the monotony. Step after step, dune after dune, the desert becomes less an obstacle and more a dreamscape, timeless and endless. The caravan moves like a slow beast, breathing in sand, exhaling songs, inching closer to Egypt, where the world will finally see what Mali has carried across this furnace of earth. The desert finally gives way, and with a sigh of relief you step into the lush delta of the Nile. Palms sway. Markets hum and Cairo sprawls like a jewel in the sand. The caravan has survived the Sahara, and now Musa enters a city unprepared for what's about to happen. The mainstream historical fact: Musa arrived in Cairo in 1324, and his generosity became the stuff of legend. Chroniclers wrote that he spent so much gold, gifting it to the poor, to scholars, to merchants, that he disrupted Egypt's economy. Gold's value fell, inflation soared, and it reportedly took over a decade for the market to recover. Imagine being so generous you accidentally crash an entire economy. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some stories claim that Musa's entourage included 500 slaves, each carrying a gold staff, and dozens of camels loaded with hundreds of pounds of pure gold. Picture Cairo's merchants blinking as they watch a literal parade of walking treasure stroll past their shop stalls. One baker probably fainted right into his dough. Historians still argue about the scale of this gold crash. Was it as catastrophic as some chroniclers claimed, or were the stories exaggerated by later writers eager to dramatize Musa's wealth? Some scholars think the Cairo market absorbed the shock faster than reported. But whether temporary or lasting, the impression Musa left was indelible. Mali was absurdly, impossibly rich. Walk with him into Cairo's bustling streets. You hear donkeys braying, vendors shouting prices for figs and bread, and suddenly the noise hushes as Musa's procession passes. His robes shimmer, his guards gleam, and gold dust literally sprinkles into the hands of beggars. Crowds press close, eyes wide, whispers flying. Who is this man? What empire sends gold like water? Musa meets the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad. Imagine that audience. Two powerful rulers seated across from one another, the air thick with diplomacy. Musa bows with dignity, offering lavish gifts, refusing nothing asked of him. The Sultan is dazzled, Cairo's court astonished. For them, West Africa is no longer a vague rumor, but a golden reality embodied in one man. And the city reacts. Prices of goods skyrocket, gold coins lose value, merchants grumble while beggars cheer. Some men become rich overnight, others watch fortunes twist. Musa doesn't stay long, but his impact ripples through Cairo like a pebble tossed into the Nile. Concentric rings of wealth, confusion, and awe. By night, the caravan camps outside the city. Fires flicker, gold glitters in the torchlight, and musicians play while Cairo still buzzes with disbelief. Musa prays quietly, as he always does, steady amid the chaos he has unintentionally unleashed. You sit in that silence with him, hearing the distant hum of Cairo's markets, the shuffle of camels resting, and the faintest echo of history shifting. Musa has just announced Mali to the world, not with a battle, but with generosity so vast, it rattled economies and etched his name into legend. You linger in Cairo's afterglow only briefly, because the caravan presses onward, trailing whispers behind it like dust. Musa's pilgrimage has only just begun. His true destination lies further east, across deserts and fertile lands, toward the heart of Islam itself, Mecca. Along the way, the wider world opens before him like a curtain being pulled back. The mainstream historical fact: Musa's Hajj took him through Cairo, across the Sinai and eventually into the holy city of Mecca, where he performed the rituals of pilgrimage with all the humility and grandeur one might expect from a ruler both devout and dazzlingly wealthy. His presence was noted far beyond Arabia. Venetian and Genoese merchants later wrote of him, and even European mapmakers placed a crowned African king holding a golden nugget on their charts, labeling him Musa of Mali. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers claimed Musa distributed so much gold in Mecca that even the beggars grew choosy. Imagine being a medieval street beggar, suddenly turning up your nose at a gold coin because, frankly, you already had too many. It's the medieval version of, "No thanks, I already won the lottery yesterday." Historians still argue how much direct contact Musa had with foreign rulers. Did he personally meet emissaries from Morocco, Yemen, or even the Mongols? Or were these connections exaggerated by later writers to heighten the story of his fame? What's certain is that news of his generosity spread quickly, carried by merchants who traded stories as eagerly as they traded goods. In Mecca, Musa completes the sacred rites. Picture him circling the Kaaba, robes glinting, attendants careful not to overshadow the humility required of pilgrims. Even in his grandeur, Musa bends his forehead to the ground, aligning himself with millions of Muslims before him. For all his wealth, this is the moment where he is just another believer, whispering prayers under the desert stars, yet around him the spectacle never ceases. His caravan becomes a subject of fascination, drawing scholars, merchants, and rulers who want to meet the man whose gold seems endless. Letters are exchanged, alliances hinted at, friendships forged. Musa's pilgrimage becomes more than personal devotion. It becomes diplomacy on a world stage. Mali, once distant and shadowy in the minds of many, now gleams vividly across maps and imaginations. At night, after the rituals and the ceremonies, Musa sits quietly in his tent. The stars above Arabia look different from those over Mali, but they whisper the same eternal stories. You imagine him reflecting. He has fulfilled his duty, shown his devotion, and unintentionally or not, made his empire famous. Tomorrow emissaries will speak of him in Damascus, in Tunis, in Venice. But tonight he is just a man with sand on his sandals, murmuring prayers of gratitude. You lean into that silence, lulled by the image of a king who walked into the world stage not with armies, but with faith and gold, leaving echoes that will ring for centuries. You turn westward now, following Musa as he begins his long journey home. The desert winds are the same, the camel bells still clink, but the caravan carries something new: vision. Musa has seen the grandeur of Cairo and Mecca, touched the heart of the wider Islamic world, and he is returning not as a provincial monarch, but as a global figure. His footsteps are heavy with plans. The mainstream historical fact: Musa brought back scholars, clerics, and architects from his pilgrimage, most famously the Andalusian builder Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. These men were not mere guests. They were seeds planted in Malian soil. shaping the empire's cultural and architectural future. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some stories say Musa's caravan was so weighed down on the return trip, not with gold now, but with books, scholars and artisans, that camels groaned louder than before. Imagine the animals thinking, "We carried treasure east and now you're loading us with libraries." The true wealth Musa sought wasn't just gold anymore. It was knowledge. Historians still argue whether these scholars came willingly, dazzled by Mali's wealth, or whether Musa used his fortune to persuade them. Some accounts suggest gifts of gold convinced even reluctant minds to journey back with him. What isn't debated is their impact. Timbuktu and other cities blossomed into centers of learning because of the people Musa brought home. You picture the caravan trudging back across the Sahara, this time with an entourage of foreign accents mixing with local songs. Nights at camp are different. Griots sing epics while Andalusian architects sketch designs in the sand, and imams debate finer points of law under the stars. Musa sits among them, nodding quietly, already imagining mosques rising, schools bustling, and Timbuktu becoming more than a trade post. It will be a beacon. When they finally reach Mali again, the empire greets them with astonishment. Farmers, smiths and traders see not only their ruler return safe, but surrounded by men whose clothing, speech and knowledge radiate strangeness and prestige. Musa's pilgrimage hasn't just enriched foreign cities, it has transformed his own. The empire looks at him differently now, not only as their king, but as the man who has carried Mali into the center of the world's gaze. And so the return is not an ending, but a beginning. The fields still need planting, caravans still march, markets still hum, but beneath it all something has shifted. Musa has returned with new tools, ideas, designs, scholars, that will reshape the empire into a legacy. The journey east was a duty. The journey west is a promise. You let yourself rest in that moment. The caravan cresting the horizon, camels groaning, scholars murmuring, and Musa gazing toward Niani with the calm of a man who has carried gold across the world and brought back knowledge worth even more. You arrive with Musa back at the bend of the Niger, where the dust of trade routes mixes with the murmur of students' voices. Timbuktu, once just a practical stop for merchants and herders, is now beginning to glow with the strange light of learning. Musa has returned with architects, scholars, and vision, and here he begins to plant his most enduring seed, knowledge, the mainstream historical fact. Under Musa, Timbuktu grew into one of the world's leading centers of Islamic scholarship. The University of Sankore, along with other madrasas, attracted thousands of students. These schools became repositories of astronomy, medicine, mathematics, law, and theology. Their libraries filled with manuscripts that survive in fragments even today. Here's your quirky tidbit. Manuscripts in Timbuktu weren't only Quranic commentaries or philosophy. Some were practical guides on things like herbal remedies, astrology, and even how to improve handwriting. Imagine a scholar laboring for months to copy a book, only to have it be a medieval self-help manual on how to write more neatly. Some things never change. Historians still argue about the scale. Was Sankore truly a university, comparable to Bologna or Oxford? Or was it a loose collection of scholars teaching in courtyards? Did tens of thousands really study there? Or is that number a boast woven into legend? What is certain is that Timbuktu became synonymous with wisdom, and Musa's investments made it possible. You walk through Sankore's courtyard. The mosque's mud brick walls glow in the afternoon sun, wooden beams jutting outward like ribs. Inside, students sit cross-legged on mats, chanting passages, scribbling with reed pens onto tablets dusted with chalk. The air hums with concentration, broken only by the occasional sneeze from all that desert dust. Teachers lecture beneath the shade of awnings, quoting scholars from as far away as Baghdad. Knowledge here feels both local and infinite, tethered to the earth yet reaching for the stars. Musa funds salaries for teachers, provides paper and ink, and ensures that caravans bring books from Cairo, Damascus, and beyond. In an age when a single manuscript might be worth more than a horse, Musa treats books as treasures. He knows that gold can dazzle, but words can endure. Timbuktu soon buzzes with visitors, scholars debating law, merchants trading books for salt, griots adapting new ideas into song. The city smells of parchment and ink, of spices and livestock, of dust and hope. By night, torches glow through narrow streets, and voices still echo. Students arguing about the stars, imams reciting prayers, griots weaving it all into memory. Musa himself, now older, walks the courtyards sometimes, his presence quiet but magnetic. Students glance up in awe, realizing that their studies exist because this ruler decided knowledge mattered as much as gold. And perhaps you see him smile faintly, knowing this. More than caravans or coins will be his true wealth. You linger here, lulled by the hum of scholars, the rustle of parchment, the soft scratching of pens. It is a sound like rainfall, steady and nourishing, soaking into the soil of history. Musa has turned Timbuktu into a beacon, and its glow will outlast even the brightest of golden thrones. You drift into the palace once more, but now the air carries not just the scent of incense and roasted grain, but the sharper tang of politics. Musa has built mosques, nurtured scholars, and flooded markets with gold, but even the grandest reign is never free of murmurs. In the shadows of courtyards and in the whispers of griots, stories begin to swirl. The mainstream historical fact: griots were more than entertainers. They were keepers of history and counselors to kings. They could preserve Musa's triumphs, but they could also remind him, publicly, of past mistakes or obligations. Their songs were history textbooks set to music, and everyone listened. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some griots carried carved staffs tipped with brass or silver, which they tapped rhythmically as they recited. Imagine trying to nap in the courtyard, only to be jolted awake by a griot staff clanging against stone, as he dramatically rehashes your grandfather's questionable war decisions. History was impossible to escape in Mali. Historians still argue how much of the griot's tales about Musa are factual and how much was embellishment. Did Musa truly command 60,000 men on pilgrimage? Did he fund every mosque personally? Or did griots polish the stories until they gleamed brighter than gold? What matters is that these stories shaped how people saw their ruler, blending fact, myth, and memory into one seamless tapestry. And beneath the songs, there are whispers of intrigue. Court rivals eye Musa's favor with scholars and architects from abroad. Some chiefs grumble that the emperor is too generous to outsiders, too focused on mosques instead of warriors. Others whisper about succession, always a dangerous topic in royal halls. Who will inherit this empire when the Mansa is gone? Sons, nephews, rivals, all potential sparks waiting near dry straw. You overhear a griot reciting in the evening, his voice low and rhythmic. Praise for Musa's pilgrimage. Yes, but also warnings drawn from history. He reminds the court of Sundiata Keita's struggles to unify the clans, of kings who fell because they ignored balance. Musa listens, eyes calm, but perhaps his mind lingers on the caution hidden within the melody. Even in Timbuktu, as scholars copy texts, rumors swirl. Some say Musa's generosity in Cairo was reckless, others that it was divine providence. Traders spin tales of his caravan, until each retelling doubles in size. You can almost see the empire itself swelling under these stories, both glorified and burdened by myth. At night, Musa sits in the palace, griots' voices fading, courtiers whispering in corners, and you sense the tension beneath the calm surface. He has built something extraordinary, but like the mud brick mosques that need yearly replastering, his empire must constantly be maintained, lest the desert winds wear it down. You lean into that uneasy calm, the hum of praise mixing with the buzz of intrigue, knowing that even legends are not immune to the fraying threads of politics and gossip. The nights feel heavier now, and you notice the subtle shift in Musa's gait. The man who once strode boldly into Cairo's markets now walks more slowly, his beard flecked with grey, his eyes carrying both wisdom and fatigue. Age has found him, as it finds everyone, even emperors wrapped in gold. The mainstream historical fact: Mansa Musa ruled for roughly 25 years, long enough to oversee Mali's height of wealth, scholarship, and fame. By the later years of his reign, the empire was vast and complex, demanding constant attention to trade, alliances, and succession. And the quirky tidbit: West African healers sometimes prescribed ground baobab seeds mixed with honey as a tonic for aging rulers. Picture Musa, the richest man alive, sipping what amounts to a medieval smoothie, trying to convince himself it would add a few more years of vigor. Historians still argue how Musa spent these final years, whether he remained deeply involved in ruling or delegated more to heirs and advisors. Some sources suggest he grew increasingly preoccupied with ensuring a smooth succession, aware that great empires can unravel quickly if heirs squabble. Others suggest he withdrew somewhat, letting his monumental project speak for him while he turned his focus toward spiritual preparation. You see him in the palace courtyard at dusk, listening to griots sing of his pilgrimage, his building works, his scholars. Their voices swell with praise, yet Musa's expression is distant. He seems less interested in what has been done, and more concerned with what will remain. The thought of mortality presses on him, heavy, unavoidable, and strangely quiet. He watches his sons train with guards, debating laws, practicing diplomacy. Which of them will inherit the throne? Which will be strong enough to hold together an empire of farmers, miners, traders, griots, and scholars? He knows too well that even the brightest flame flickers when the fuel runs low. At night his prayers grow longer. The Mansa kneels, forehead to the ground, whispering verses into the darkness. Wealth can no longer dazzle him. Gold is dust in the scale of eternity. You sense him wondering, when he is gone, will Mali endure as he shaped it, or will it crumble like neglected mud walls in the rainy season? Still, even in age, Musa radiates authority. When he speaks, courtiers bow, caravans stir, scholars pause. His presence remains the spine of the empire. Yet you, walking beside him in the stillness, feel the fragility creeping in. The empire is strong, yes, but it is also human, dependent on his life, his choices, his heirs. The stars above the Niger shine cold and eternal. Musa gazes upward, and you can almost hear his thoughts. My time grows short. My legacy must outlive me. And with that realization, you too feel the weight of mortality pressing like desert heat, softened only by the hum of night insects and the faint scent of honey from his tonic. The empire feels quieter now, as though even the drums have softened out of respect for a man nearing his end. Musa, once the vibrant ruler who stunned Cairo and reshaped Timbuktu, moves more slowly through his courtyards. The same air that once carried the clang of masons and the chants of scholars now carries whispers. The Mansa is fading. The mainstream historical fact: Mansa Musa is believed to have died around 1337, though some scholars place his death later, closer to 1341. Records are hazy. No chronicler wrote the exact moment. What is certain is that his passing marked the end of Mali's golden peak, though echoes of his reign lingered for decades. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some West African traditions held that a king should be buried with a few possessions, not his entire treasure. Imagine Musa's attendants debating which of the world's richest man's items counted as a few. A ring? A robe? Maybe not the hundreds of pounds of gold bars, thanks. Even in death, Musa's wealth was impossible to summarize neatly. Historians still argue about how Musa died. Was it illness brought on by age? Was it stress from ruling an empire so vast? Or did he quietly step aside, letting his son Magawai take the throne while he withdrew into reflection? The debate continues, and perhaps the truth is buried in the sands along with him. You picture his final days. The palace is hushed, courtiers pacing softly, griots lowering their songs. Musa rests on a cushioned seat, his eyes dimmer but still sharp. He listens as imams recite the Quran beside him, the verses drifting like cool water through a fevered room. He knows the empire will outlast him, though perhaps not in the same brilliance. He has planted mosques, universities, trade routes, and stories. These will carry him forward. When he finally slips away, the empire mourns. Markets close, drums fall silent, and traders pause their caravans. Griots begin to weave the tale immediately, their voices heavy with both loss and pride. They chant of the boy who became a ruler, of the ruler who carried gold across the desert, of the king whose name echoed from Cairo to Venice. But life, as always, moves on. His son takes the throne. The caravans march again, the fields demand planting. Still, something feels different. The sun has set on a reign that dazzled the known world. Mali remains rich, but the steady hand that guided it has gone. You stand by the riverbank at dusk, watching the sky glow orange, and imagine the empire itself whispering farewell. The Niger flows on, indifferent yet eternal, carrying whispers of Musa's name downstream, toward the ocean, toward memory, toward legend. The air feels lighter now, as though the empire exhales after holding its breath through Musa's passing. Yet his presence lingers, stitched into every caravan, mosque, and manuscript. You notice how his name begins to travel even farther than he ever did, echoing across continents, mutating into legend. The mainstream historical fact. Musa's fame spread beyond Africa through the writings of Arab chroniclers like al-Umari and through the maps of European cartographers. On the Catalan Atlas of 1375, Musa appears as a crowned black king, golden orb in hand, seated regally in West Africa. To Europeans who had never seen Mali, Musa became the very symbol of wealth. Here's your quirky tidbit. Stories of Musa's gold were sometimes exaggerated to absurdity. One tale claimed he built a palace entirely out of solid gold bricks. Imagine trying to sit comfortably in a gold chair. Slippery, cold, and probably terrible for your back. But exaggeration was the point. Musa's wealth became a canvas for imagination. Historians still argue whether Musa's legacy was preserved more accurately within Mali itself or in the outside world's fantasies. Inside Mali, griots wove him into the same lineage as Sundiata, grounding him in history. Outside, merchants and mapmakers often turned him into a caricature of endless riches. Which version was closer to truth? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. In Timbuktu, scholars still recited under the mud brick towers he built, their manuscripts multiplying, their debates sharpening. Along the trade routes, Merchants boasted that they had passed through the empire of the Golden King. And far away in Italian port cities, sailors swapped tales of an African monarch so rich he could sink economies by accident. His legend became currency of its own, traded in stories rather than coins. You sit with a griot one evening, his voice weaving Musa's tale into epic rhythm. He sings of deserts crossed, of gold scattered in Cairo, of mosques rising from clay. His staff taps the ground steady as a heartbeat, ensuring that the story does not fade. Children listen wide-eyed, merchants nod knowingly, and Musa's name glows brighter than the fire itself. In Europe, mapmakers ink his image, a small crowned figure holding a golden ball. For them, Mali is not a vast empire of farmers and scholars. It is Musa himself, frozen in time, eternal wealth on a page. In this way, he becomes both more and less than human, a symbol of riches, a story passed from tongue to tongue, a myth that refuses to quiet down. And so, even though his body lies in Mali's soil, his shadow stretches across oceans. Musa, the boy who once ran barefoot in dust, has become timeless. His empire will rise and falter, as all do, but his legend will keep wandering. Restless as a caravan that never stops, the nights grow longer, and you feel the empire slowly dimming, like embers cooling in the hearth. Musa's reign has passed into memory, his legend carried by griots and maps, but time is relentless. Mali's golden age glows for a while, then flickers. Yet for you, lying here in the stillness, his story has become something softer, a bedtime hum rather than a blinding flame, the mainstream historical fact. After Musa's death, Mali remained powerful but gradually declined. Successors struggled with internal disputes and external pressures. Trade routes shifted, rivals rose, and the empire's brilliance slowly waned. By the 15th century, Mali's dominance had faded, though the memory of Musa endured. And your quirky tidbit, even centuries later, European explorers heading inland in Africa carried wild tales of a golden city. Timbuktu, where streets glittered with treasure. These myths were echoes of Musa's reign, stretched and bent until they became bedtime stories for adventurers. People risked their lives chasing a sparkle that was, by then, mostly memory. Historians still argue whether Musa's generosity in Cairo was a wise act of diplomacy or reckless extravagance. Was he a pious ruler shaping faith, or a showman dazzling foreigners with wealth? The debates continue, and maybe that's the point. His story resists being neatly folded. You return once more to Timbuktu's mud walls, to the sound of students chanting, to the smell of dust and ink. You trace the river winding under a golden sunset, its waters carrying whispers of Musa's name out to sea. You sit in a courtyard where griots still tap their staffs, where stories of the Lion King Sundiata meet those of the Golden King Musa, and you realize they've merged into one endless rhythm. And now, as you lie back, the noise of caravans fades, the clink of coins grows faint. The chanting of scholars becomes a murmur. Even the drums of the griots soften until they're no louder than your own breathing. Musa's golden empire drifts into twilight, not with collapse but with calm surrender. Like a candle slowly guttering in a quiet room, the night air is cool now, softer than before, and every sound stretches into a lull. The endless deserts, the bustling markets, the crowded mosques. They all recede into the background, leaving only a faint glow in memory. You are no longer trudging with caravans or standing in royal courts. You are floating, gentle as a leaf drifting on the Niger's current. Imagine the river at dusk, wide, slow, and golden with the reflection of the setting sun. Birds skim the surface, their wings barely touching the water. while fishermen draw in nets with unhurried motions. The empire is distant, its bustle replaced by stillness. The river flows on unbothered by crowns or coins, eternal in its quiet rhythm. You breathe slowly. The weight of history feels lighter now, less like a crown and more like a blanket drawn around you. Musa's story has faded into the realm of dreams, gold scattered into sand, palaces melting back into mud, griots' voices thinning into silence. What remains is the calm certainty that all empires, no matter how dazzling, dissolve into memory, and memory itself drifts like smoke into the night. You let go of the gold, the caravans, the debates. You let go of the stories, the grandeur, the questions without answers. What remains is the steady pulse of your own breath, the quiet hum of the world around you, and the gentle invitation to sleep. The torches are out. The stars are steady. The hum of history has become a whisper. And as the last echoes of Mansa Musa's journey fade, you too are free to close your eyes and drift, carried by a river that never ends.